The gunshot echoed across the desolate valley as Harriet Galloway crumpled to the ground, the searing pain in her leg overwhelming her senses as blood seeped through her riding skirt. She had been ambushed, miles from civilization, with nothing but the vast California wilderness surrounding her and the relentless summer sun beating down upon her wounded body. Quinn Everett had been tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on his cattle when he heard the gunshot. It wasn't hunting season, and something about the solitary crack of gunfire, followed by silence, set his instincts on edge. Spurring his horse forward, he crested the ridge to see a woman's form sprawled beside her spooked horse, which was nervously pawing at the ground nearby. It was 1878, and the wild stretches of land surrounding Skidoo, California, remained largely untamed. Quinn had established his modest ranch 3 years prior after serving as a cavalry scout in the Indian Wars, a time in his life he preferred not to dwell upon. At 32, he had resigned himself to solitude, finding more comfort in the company of horses and cattle than townsfolk. "Madam," he called cautiously as he approached, his Winchester rifle ready in case whoever had shot her remained nearby. "Are you alive?" Harriet's eyelids fluttered, her vision blurring as she gazed up at the figure silhouetted against the bright sky. "Ambush," she managed to whisper through parched lips. "3 men took my valuables." Her voice was barely audible, her strength fading with each passing moment. Quinn dismounted quickly, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger before kneeling beside the wounded woman. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat, auburn hair falling loose from what had once been an elegant updo. He guessed her to be in her mid-20s, and her clothing, though now dirty and torn, suggested she wasn't from these parts. "I need to stop this bleeding," he said, reaching for his canteen. "This might hurt some." He tore a strip from his own shirt and pressed it against the wound on her outer thigh, causing Harriet to cry out weakly. "My name's Quinn Everett," he said, trying to keep her conscious. "My ranch is about 4 miles from here. Can you tell me your name?" "Harriet," she whispered, her voice growing fainter. "Harriet Galloway. I was traveling to San Francisco. Stagecoach broke an axle yesterday. Decided to ride ahead." Her words trailed off as her eyes rolled back, consciousness slipping away from her. Quinn worked quickly, creating a makeshift tourniquet above the wound. The bullet had passed through her leg, which was fortunate, but she was losing blood rapidly, and in the heat of the California summer, infection would set in quickly. After securing her wound as best he could, Quinn gathered her limp form into his arms and managed to lift her onto his horse. He tied her horse's reins to his saddle horn and mounted behind her, holding her carefully against his chest as he urged his stallion into a steady trot toward his ranch. By the time they arrived, Harriet was burning with fever. The wound had already begun to show angry red streaks spreading outward signs of infection, taking hold with alarming speed. Quinn carried her into his modest cabin and placed her gently on his bed, the only proper one in the house. "Miss Galloway," he said firmly, patting her cheek lightly, "can you hear me? I need to tend to your wound properly." Her eyes opened slightly, glazed with fever and pain. "So thirsty," she murmured. Quinn held a cup of water to her lips, letting her sip slowly. "I need to clean your wound. It's going to hurt something fierce, but it needs doing or the infection will spread." She nodded weakly, understanding enough despite her deteriorating condition. He worked efficiently, cutting away the fabric of her riding skirt to expose the wound. Under different circumstances, Quinn would have been mortified at the impropriety, but he'd seen enough battlefield injuries to know that modesty had no place when fighting infection. He heated water, adding a splash of whiskey to it, and began the painful process of cleaning the wound. Harriet's screams tore through him as he worked, but he continued methodically, knowing her life depended on his thoroughness. When he finally applied a poultice of herbs he'd learned to use from an old Cherokee man years ago, she had passed out from the pain. That night, Quinn sat beside her bed, continuously replacing wet cloths on her forehead as fever ravaged her body. Her delirious mutterings revealed fragments of her story. She was a teacher from Boston who had accepted a position at a school in San Francisco. There were mentions of a broken engagement, a desire for a new beginning, and fear that she would die in this strange wilderness before her life had truly begun. "You're not going to die," Quinn assured her, though he wasn't certain she could hear him. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Dawn broke with Harriet's condition worsening. The infection was spreading despite Quinn's efforts, and her fever raged higher. He knew he needed help, but the nearest town was 20 miles away, and he couldn't leave her alone. Making a difficult decision, Quinn saddled his fastest horse and rode hard to his nearest neighbor, an elderly couple named the Wilsons, who lived 7 miles to the west. Mrs. Wilson had been a nurse during the Civil War, and if anyone could help Harriet, she could. "I can't come right now, son," Mrs. Wilson said apologetically after hearing Quinn's hurried explanation. "My George broke his hip last week, and I can't leave him. But here," she went to a cabinet and began gathering various medicines and supplies. "Take these. The quinine for the fever, this powder for the infection. Mix it with water into a paste and apply it directly to the wound. Change it every 4 hours." Quinn thanked her profusely and rode back to his ranch with renewed determination, praying he hadn't been away too long. When he arrived, Harriet was thrashing in the bed, her nightclothes soaked with sweat, calling out for someone named Elizabeth. For the next 2 days, Quinn barely slept, maintaining a constant vigil by Harriet's bedside. He cleaned and dressed her wound regularly, spooned broth and water between her parched lips when she was lucid enough to swallow, and spoke to her continuously, hoping his voice might anchor her to the world of the living. "You've got to fight, Miss Galloway," he urged when her breathing became particularly labored during the second night. "There's a whole new life waiting for you in San Francisco. Those children need a teacher with your determination." Whether it was his words, Mrs. Wilson's medicines, or Harriet's own will to live, her fever broke slightly on the 3rd morning. Though still dangerously ill, her breathing steadied, and she opened her eyes with a hint of recognition. "You're still here," she whispered, her voice rough from dehydration and screaming. "Where else would I be?" Quinn replied, relief flooding through him. "This is my house." A ghost of a smile crossed her cracked lips before she drifted back to sleep, this time more peacefully than before. The improvement was short-lived, however. By nightfall, the fever had returned with a vengeance, and Quinn noticed with horror that the infection was spreading again. Angry red lines now reaching toward her hip. Desperate, he remembered an old remedy his mother had used when he was a boy, a poultice of bread mold and honey. It seemed primitive compared to Mrs. Wilson's medicinal powders, but he had heard army doctors discuss the healing properties of certain molds during the war. With nothing to lose, Quinn prepared the unusual poultice and applied it to Harriet's wound, wrapping it carefully. Then he resumed his vigil, holding her hand through the worst of her feverish spasms, speaking softly about his ranch, the mountains visible from his porch, the family of deer that visited the stream behind his property, anything to keep her tethered to life. By the 4th day, Quinn was running on nothing but black coffee and determination. The lines in his face had deepened from exhaustion, his normally neat appearance replaced by stubble and rumpled clothing. Yet he refused to rest, convinced that any moment he spent sleeping might be the moment Harriet Galloway needed him most. To his immense relief, the unusual poultice seemed to be working. The angry red streaks had stopped spreading, and though Harriet remained fevered, her lucid periods grew longer. During one such moment, she studied his haggard face with concern. "You look terrible," she murmured, her voice stronger than before. Quinn laughed softly. "Well, you're not exactly ready for a society ball yourself, Miss Galloway." Her lips curved into a smile. "Harriet," she corrected. "After all you've done, I believe you've earned the right to use my Christian name." "Harriet," he repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on his tongue. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by wild horses," she admitted, "but I think I might live after all, thanks to you." Her green eyes, though still bright with fever, held genuine gratitude. "You haven't slept, have you?" Quinn shrugged. "I've gone longer without sleep during roundup." You should rest, she insisted, her teacher's authority showing through despite her weakened state. I'll rest when you're out of danger, he replied stubbornly. By the 5th day, Harriet's fever finally broke completely. The wound, though still serious, showed clear signs of healing. Quinn allowed himself a brief 2-hour nap while she slept peacefully, the first real rest he had had since finding her. When he woke, he found Harriet attempting to sit up in bed, her face pale with the effort but determined. "Whoa there," Quinn said, rushing to her side. "You're not ready to be up and about yet." "I need to send word to San Francisco," she explained. "The school term starts in 3 weeks and they're expecting me, and I should thank you properly for saving my life." "You can thank me by not undoing all my hard work," he replied, gently easing her back against the pillows. "As for San Francisco, we can send a telegram from town once you're stronger." Harriet nodded, resigned to her temporary confinement. "Will you tell me about yourself, Mr. Everett? I feel I should know something about the man who has seen me in such a compromised state." Quinn's ears reddened slightly at her reference to the necessary improprieties of treating her wound. "Not much to tell," he said gruffly. "Grew up in Missouri, fought in the war, spent some time as a cavalry scout, then decided I'd had enough of following orders and killing. Came west, worked cattle drives for a few years, saved enough to buy this place." "You live here alone?" she asked. "Just me and the livestock," he confirmed. "Suits me fine." "No family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents to typhoid when I was 19. No siblings, no wife." He changed the subject quickly. "What about you? What brings a Boston schoolteacher all the way to California?" Harriet looked down at her hands, her expression tightening. "A fresh start," she said simply. Then, after a pause, "I was engaged to be married. Edward was a banker's son, very respectable, very suitable. Or so I thought until I discovered he had been keeping company with my cousin while courting me." "Fool," Quinn muttered. Indeed, the humiliation was considerable. "When I saw the advertisement for a teaching position in San Francisco, it seemed like Providence, as far from Boston as I could reasonably go while remaining in the country." Quinn studied her face, noting the quiet dignity with which she spoke of her betrayal. "His loss," he said finally. "Any man who'd look elsewhere when he had your promise isn't worth mourning." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "You're kind to say so." "Just stating facts, madam. Now, how about some broth? You need your strength." Over the next 2 days, as Harriet's condition continued to improve, they fell into a comfortable routine. Quinn would help her sit up for meals, change her bandages with professional efficiency, and spend hours conversing with her. He discovered she was well-read and articulate, with opinions on everything from politics to poetry. For her part, Harriet found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet strength of the cowboy who had saved her life, noticing the gentleness in his calloused hands and the intelligence behind his laconic manner. On the 7th day, Quinn finally allowed himself a proper night's sleep, confident that Harriet was out of danger. He made a pallet on the floor of the main room, insisting she continue to use his bed until she was fully recovered. "I can travel to town tomorrow," he told her over supper, the first real meal she'd been able to eat. "Send that telegram to San Francisco for you. Let them know you've been delayed, but you're recovering." Harriet nodded, though a strange reluctance filled her at the thought of continuing her journey. "That would be kind of you. I should also inquire about transportation." "I've imposed on your hospitality for far too long." "You're welcome to stay until you're properly healed," Quinn said quickly, surprising himself with his eagerness to extend her stay. "It's no imposition." Their eyes met across the table, a moment of silent understanding passing between them. Something had changed during those long days and nights of fever and healing, a connection forged in crisis that neither was quite ready to name. The next day, Quinn rode into Ski-Doo, a small but growing mining settlement that served as the nearest outpost of civilization. He sent Harriet's telegram, arranged for the delivery of some proper women's clothing from the general store, and inquired about stagecoach schedules to San Francisco. Won't be another stage heading that way for 2 weeks, the station manager informed him. Last one left yesterday and the next is delayed on account of the driver breaking his arm in a bar fight down in Los Angeles. Quinn nodded, feeling an inappropriate surge of satisfaction at this news. Much obliged, he said, tipping his hat. He purchased a few other supplies, including a bottle of proper medicine from the town's physician, and headed back to the ranch. When he returned, he found Harriet sitting on his front porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm afternoon. Her face lit up at his approach, a reaction that sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "You shouldn't be out of bed," he chided gently as he dismounted. "The fever is completely gone, and I was going mad staring at the same 4 walls," she replied. "Besides, the view from your porch is magnificent." She gestured toward the sweeping vista of mountains and valleys. "I can see why you chose this place." Quinn smiled as he unloaded his purchases. "First time I saw it, I knew it was home. Didn't matter that the cabin was barely standing and the fences were falling down. Just felt right." He handed her a package. "Got you some clothes. Hope they fit." Harriet accepted the package with surprise. "You didn't have to do that. Can't have you wearing my old shirts forever, though I admit they look better on you than they do on me." She blushed at the compliment, acutely aware that she had been dressed in his spare clothing since her own had been ruined by blood and the necessary cutting to access her wound. "What did the telegraph operator say? Did my message go through?" Quinn nodded, settling into the chair beside her. "It did, and I checked on transportation. No stagecoach to San Francisco for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Harriet exclaimed. "But the school term—" "Your telegram explained the delay. I'm sure they'll understand that getting shot isn't something you planned." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I suppose you're right, but I hate to impose on you for so long." "It's no imposition," Quinn said quietly. "Truth is, it's nice having someone to talk to besides the horses." Harriet smiled at that. "Well, if I'm to stay, I insist on making myself useful once I'm stronger. I may be a city girl, but I'm not afraid of work." "We'll see about that when you can walk more than 3 steps without wincing," he replied with a small smile. "For now, your job is to heal." Over the next few days, Harriet's strength returned gradually. She began moving around the cabin, insisting on helping with meal preparation and other light tasks. Quinn watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern, stepping in whenever he felt she was pushing herself too hard. 10 days after the shooting, Harriet finally asked the question that had been on her mind since her fever broke. "Do you think they'll come back? The men who shot me?" Quinn's expression darkened. "I've been keeping an eye out, but I doubt it. Probably just passing bandits who've moved on to easier targets." He didn't tell her that he'd been taking his rifle when he checked his fence lines, or that he'd arranged with a neighboring rancher to keep watch for suspicious strangers. "I should know how to protect myself," she said thoughtfully. "Living in San Francisco may not be as dangerous as the open country, but it's not Boston either." "You wanting to learn to shoot? Is that outlandish, for a woman to know how to handle a firearm?" Quinn shook his head. "Not out here, it isn't. Most women I know can shoot well enough to protect themselves in their homes. If you're feeling up to it, I could teach you." The following afternoon found them behind the cabin, where Quinn had set up several empty cans on a fallen log. Harriet stood with her feet planted as he'd instructed, holding his revolver with both hands. "Remember, it's going to kick back more than you expect," Quinn warned, standing close behind her. "Keep your arms firm but not locked." Harriet nodded, her face a mask of concentration. She squeezed the trigger, the report of the gun startling a flock of birds from a nearby tree. The bullet missed the can by several inches. "Not bad for a first try," Quinn encouraged. "Try again, but this time, breathe out slowly as you squeeze the trigger." She adjusted her stance slightly and fired again. This time, the rightmost can flew off the log. "I did it!" she exclaimed, turning to Quinn with a brilliant smile that made his heart skip. "You're a natural, Miss Galloway," he said, unable to help returning her smile. They continued the impromptu shooting lesson until Harriet had hit 4 of the 6 cans. By then, her wounded leg was beginning to ache from standing, and Quinn insisted they return to the cabin. As the days passed, they fell into a comfortable rhythm of coexistence. Harriet's wound healed remarkably well, though she still walked with a slight limp that Quinn assured her would fade with time. She took over more household duties, revealing a talent for cooking that surprised them both, given her privileged Boston upbringing. My mother believed that all proper ladies should know their way around a kitchen, regardless of their station, she explained as she expertly kneaded dough for biscuits. She said one never knew when servants might be unavailable. Quinn watched her work, struck by how natural she looked in his kitchen, as if she belonged there. The thought was both appealing and unsettling. In less than a week, she would board a stagecoach for San Francisco, and his life would return to its previous solitude. The prospect, once comforting, now seemed bleak. Harriet, too, found herself increasingly troubled by the approaching departure. Each day spent in Quinn's company revealed new facets of his character that she admired: his quiet competence, his unexpected gentleness with injured animals, the dry humor that emerged once he was comfortable in her presence. She had come west seeking a new beginning, but she hadn't expected to find someone who made her question her carefully laid plans. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Harriet broke their comfortable silence with a question. "Do you ever get lonely out here, Quinn?" He considered the question seriously before answering. "Used to think I preferred being alone. After the war, after some of the things I saw and did, seemed easier that way." He paused, his eyes on the distant mountains. "But lately I'm not so sure." Harriet felt her pulse quicken at his words. "What changed your mind?" His eyes met hers, their usual reserve giving way to something warmer. "I think you know the answer to that, Harriet." The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken possibilities. Harriet found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Quinn's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on the arm of her chair, his touch sending a current of awareness through her body. The moment was broken by the distant howl of a coyote, followed by an answering chorus from the hills. Quinn withdrew his hand reluctantly and cleared his throat. "I should check on the livestock before dark," he said, rising from his chair. "Coyotes have been bold lately." Harriet nodded, trying to mask her disappointment. "Of course." That night, she lay awake in his bed, still trying to reconcile her feelings. In Boston, courtship was a formal affair conducted under the watchful eyes of family and society. Here, in this remote cabin with a man she had known for barely 2 weeks, she felt more genuinely seen and valued than she ever had during her year-long engagement to Edward. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Quinn was repairing a saddle on the porch, while Harriet read aloud from a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans they had discovered on his small bookshelf. The sound of approaching hoofbeats caused them both to look up, Quinn reaching instinctively for the rifle that was never far from his side these days. A man in a dusty suit rode up to the cabin, his horse looking nearly as tired as he did. "Mr. Everett?" he called. Quinn nodded cautiously. "That's me. Name's Peterson, from the Wells Fargo office in Ski-Doo. Got a telegram reply for Miss Galloway." He handed over an envelope. "And there's news about the stagecoach. Regular driver's still laid up, but they found a replacement. Stage will be coming through day after tomorrow, heading for San Francisco." Harriet felt her stomach drop at the news. Just 2 more days. "Much obliged," Quinn said, passing the envelope to Harriet. He offered the messenger water for himself and his horse before the man continued on his delivery route. Harriet opened the telegram with trembling fingers, reading the brief message. "Delighted to hear of your recovery stop position. Still waiting. Stop School Board. Sends best wishes for final journey. Stop Headmaster Williams." "Good news?" Quinn asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Harriet said softly. "They've held the position for me." An awkward silence fell between them, the imminent parting now unavoidably real. That evening, Quinn surprised her by suggesting they ride out to see a special place on his property. "If you're feeling up to it," he added, "your leg seems much stronger." "I'd love to," Harriet agreed quickly, eager for any experience they could share before their time ran out. They rode double on Quinn's gentlest mare, Harriet seated before him, acutely aware of his arms around her as he held the reins. He guided them along a winding trail through a stand of pines, emerging into a small hidden meadow beside a clear stream. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and the setting sun cast long golden shadows across the idyllic scene. "This is beautiful," Harriet breathed as Quinn helped her dismount. "Found it my first week here," he said, spreading a blanket on a grassy patch near the water. "Come here sometimes to think, or just to listen to the stream." They sat side by side on the blanket, watching the light change as the sun sank lower, neither speaking for fear of breaking the spell of the moment. When Quinn finally turned to her, his expression was more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Harriet," he began haltingly, "I'm not much good with words. Never had to use many before, but I need to say something before that stagecoach comes." Her heart raced as she met his gaze. "Yes? These past weeks having you here, it's changed things. Changed me." He took a deep breath. "I know you have plans, a position waiting, a new life all mapped out, and I have no right to ask you to reconsider any of that. But I'd never forgive myself if I didn't tell you that I've come to care for you. Deeply." Harriet's breath caught. "Quinn, you don't need to say anything," he hurried on. "I understand this isn't what you came west for. Just wanted you to know that if you ever found yourself wanting a different kind of life, there'd be a place for you here. With me." Tears welled in Harriet's eyes as the full import of his words sank in. This quiet, honorable man was offering her his heart, his home, his future, without demands or expectations, leaving the choice entirely in her hands. "I don't know what to say," she whispered truthfully. Quinn smiled sadly. "You don't have to say anything now. Just promise you'll think about it before you get on that stage." "I promise," she said fervently, reaching for his hand. Their fingers interlaced as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above the meadow. Quinn leaned toward her slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. Instead, Harriet met him halfway, her eyes closing as their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle, yet charged with the emotion of all they'd shared and all that remained unresolved between them. When they finally parted, Harriet rested her forehead against his, overwhelmed by the intensity of her feelings. "I never expected this," she confessed. "You, this place, any of it." "Life has a way of surprising us," Quinn replied, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "Sometimes for the better." They rode back to the cabin under a canopy of stars, the silence between them now comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding rather than awkward tension. Yet, as they prepared for sleep that night, the question of Harriet's departure loomed large in both their minds. The next day, their last full day together before the stagecoach's arrival, passed in a haze of heightened awareness. Every moment seemed precious, every conversation weighted with significance. Quinn taught Harriet to saddle a horse properly, their hands brushing frequently as he demonstrated the technique. She prepared a special dinner from the limited supplies available, setting the table with wildflowers gathered from near the cabin. As they ate, Quinn spoke more openly about his past than he ever had before, telling her about his childhood in Missouri, his reluctant enlistment in the Army at 18, and the horrors he had witnessed during the war. Harriet listened intently, understanding how these experiences had shaped the solitary, introspective man before her. "After I left the cavalry, I drifted for a while," he admitted. "Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for wagon trains. Kept moving because staying in one place meant getting close to people, and that seemed risky." "What changed?" Harriet asked softly. "Guess I got tired of running. Found this place by accident when I was tracking a wounded deer. Something about it just felt like home." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Never thought I'd want to share it with anyone until now." Harriet reached across the table to take his hand. "I'm honored that you would." That night, they sat together on the porch swing Quinn had built years earlier, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Harriet's head rested against his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her. Neither spoke of tomorrow's decision, yet it hung in the air between them, a question awaiting an answer. When they finally retired for the night, Quinn to his pallet on the floor and Harriet to his bed for the last time, she lay awake for hours, weighing her options. The teaching position in San Francisco represented security, independence, the fresh start she had sought after Edward's betrayal. Quinn's offer represented something entirely different, a leap of faith into the unknown. A life more physically demanding, but potentially more emotionally fulfilling than anything she had imagined for herself. Morning brought no clarity. As they shared a quiet breakfast, Harriet's trunk packed and waiting by the door, the tension between them was palpable. "Stage should be here around noon," Quinn said, pouring her a cup of coffee. Harriet nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Quinn, he shook his head. "You don't have to decide now. The offer stands, no matter what. If you go to San Francisco and find it's not what you hoped for, or if you stay there for years and someday change your mind, this door will always be open to you." Tears stung her eyes at his generosity. "You're an extraordinary man, Quinn Everett." "Just a simple cowboy who got lucky enough to find you bleeding in his valley," he replied with an attempt at lightness that didn't quite reach his eyes. They spent the remaining hours in practical tasks, Quinn checking that her trunk was securely fastened, Harriet writing down the ranch's location and nearest telegraph office for future correspondence. Neither acknowledged that such correspondence might be their only connection in the years to come. At 11:30, they heard the distant rumble of the approaching stagecoach. Quinn helped Harriet onto the porch, where they would wait for its arrival. Her leg, though nearly healed, still pained her after extended standing. As the stagecoach came into view, dust billowing behind its 6-horse team, Harriet felt panic rising in her chest. The moment of decision had arrived, and she still didn't know her own mind. "Quinn," she said urgently, turning to him, "I need to know something. If I stayed, what would that mean? For us?" He took both her hands in his gaze steady and sincere. "It would mean that I'd court you properly, as you deserve. We'd take time to know each other in ordinary days, not just in crisis. And if after that you still felt as I hope you do, I'd ask you to be my wife." The stagecoach was drawing closer, the driver already beginning to slow the team as he spotted them waiting. "And if it didn't work out," she pressed, "if we discovered we weren't suited after all, then I'd make sure you got safely to wherever you wanted to go with no hard feelings." His grip on her hands tightened slightly. "I don't want you staying out of obligation, Harriet, only out of choice." The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of the cabin, the driver calling out a greeting to Quinn. "Got room for one passenger to San Francisco if you're still needing it." Harriet looked from the waiting stagecoach to Quinn's face, her heart pounding in her chest. In that moment, with the path forward literally waiting before her, clarity finally came. "I'd like to send a telegram," she called to the driver. "Could you deliver it when you reach Ski-Doo?" The driver nodded. "For a small fee, sure thing, miss." Quinn watched, hardly daring to breathe, as Harriet quickly penned a message on a scrap of paper from her pocket and handed it to the driver along with a coin. "What does it say?" he asked as the stagecoach pulled away, continuing its journey without her. Harriet turned to him, a radiant smile spreading across her face. "It says, 'Regret unable to accept position. Stop have found unexpected happiness in California. Stop best wishes, Harriet Galloway.'" Quinn stared at her in disbelief for a moment before sweeping her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. "You're staying? You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said, laughing as he spun her around. "I came west looking for a new beginning, Quinn. I think I've found it, just not where I expected to." He set her gently back on her feet, his hands framing her face as he looked at her with wonder. "I'll make you happy, Harriet. I promise you that." "You already have," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his in a kiss that sealed her decision. True to his word, Quinn courted Harriet properly over the coming months. They took time to learn each other's habits and preferences, to discover how they worked together in the daily tasks of ranch life, to build a foundation of friendship alongside their growing love. Harriet proved surprisingly adaptable to life on the frontier, her determination and intelligence helping her master new skills quickly. She began teaching at the small school in Ski-Doo 3 days a week, riding in with Quinn when he went to town for supplies. The children adored her, and she found that teaching 20 students of varying ages in a one-room schoolhouse was challenging in entirely different ways from what she had anticipated in San Francisco. Quinn watched her flourish with pride, marveling at how completely she had integrated herself into his world while simultaneously expanding it. Under her influence, he began attending community gatherings he had previously avoided, rediscovering the pleasure of human connection beyond his solitary existence. 6 months after Harriet's fateful decision to stay, on a perfect spring day with the wildflowers blooming in their special meadow, Quinn asked her to be his wife. Her joyful acceptance surprised no one in Ski-Doo, where their courtship had been observed with approval and no small amount of romantic sentiment from the townsfolk. They were married in June of 1879, in a simple ceremony attended by their neighbors and Harriet's parents, who had traveled from Boston after receiving her letters about Quinn and her new life. Her father, initially skeptical of his daughter's dramatic change in plans, found himself grudgingly impressed by the quiet strength of his new son-in-law and the evident happiness of his daughter. Life settled into a sweet rhythm for the newlyweds. They expanded the cabin, adding a proper parlor and a second bedroom for the children they hoped would come. Quinn's cattle business prospered under their combined efforts, his practical knowledge and her head for figures proving a formidable combination. A year after their wedding, Harriet gave birth to their first child, a son they named William, after Quinn's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, followed by another son the year after that. Their home rang with children's laughter and the steady harmony of a partnership built on mutual respect and enduring love. On the 5th anniversary of the day, Quinn had found Harriet wounded in the valley. They rode out together to visit the spot. Their children were safely in the care of Mrs. Wilson for the afternoon, allowing them a rare moment alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Quinn asked as they spread a blanket in the shade of an old oak tree. "Not taking that stagecoach? The life you might have had in San Francisco?" Harriet smiled, leaning against her husband's solid chest as they looked out over the land that had become truly home to both of them. "Not for a single moment," she said with absolute certainty. "Some wounds are worth enduring for the healing that follows." Quinn pressed a kiss to the top of her head, gratitude filling his heart for the twist of fate that had brought this extraordinary woman into his life. What had begun with a gunshot and a fever had blossomed into a love story neither of them could have imagined, proof that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings arise from the most unexpected circumstances. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long golden rays across their land, Quinn and Harriet Everett sat wrapped in each other's arms, their shared past behind them and their future stretching out before them like the vast, promising horizon.